It's really great to have you all here. I think you all know who the person on my left is. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Abigail Morris. I'm the director of the Jewish Museum, and it's really lovely to have you all here today. I know that there's a huge excitement of having Susie here. I feel slightly guilty about having persuaded her, because it's partly, I did have to kind of use quite a lot of chutzpah to get her here. Chutzpah is a very good word, meaning it's a kind of Jewish word for cheek. But there was a very serious underlying thing in that I'm the mother of 3 daughters, one of whom's here, and I've watched them struggle, as well as obviously having struggled myself in becoming a woman, but watched them struggle with their feelings about their bodies and their womanhood and eating and all sorts of things. And having talked to other friends of my age who've got similar age daughters, it felt to me like there was a really huge issue which was getting worse rather than better. And that one of the things when we put on this exhibition, the Amy Winehouse exhibition, was that it became really clear to me, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, that we did it with her brother, and it's very much a family portrait. But it occurred to me that when you got behind the headlines and those awful pictures of her staggering drunk out of pubs or whatever, that if any of us, or if my girls had become ridiculously rich and famous at that critical point, how easy it would be to go off the rails. And so I suppose it was that that wanted me to put those two things together. Susie said that I should introduce her, which I find kind of quite hard because she's done so much and is such an amazing role model and intellectual, well, a giant actually, I think, in the women's movement. She's obviously famous for what she calls the Fifi, which is Fat is a Feminist Issue, which was obviously a hugely successful book, which interestingly enough, and I don't know whether this was part of success, was subtitled, I think, How to Lose Weight Without Dieting. Is that right?
Not my subtitle.
No.
I was too naive to know that you didn't control subtitles then. So by the time it came out in paper, I completely managed to get, and it was a bestseller, so I'd managed to change the subtitle.
That's interesting. And lots of other interesting books. Hunger Strike about anorexia, Bodies, How to Eat. She also founded the Women's Therapy Centre in the 70s, which is still going strong, not far from here. She set up a really interesting campaigning organisation, which is now called Endangered Bodies, was called Endangered Species. And I was lucky enough to attend one of the conferences, which we can talk about later. But I thought one of the things which really struck me was that you had a campaign against the dieting industry and the idea that any industry which promises something which it so singularly fails to deliver, anyone else would be done for trade descriptions. Because what is it, something like
97% recidivism rate, which means that you are guaranteed return customers. Because if dieting worked, you'd only have to do it once. It doesn't work, and it depends upon you putting your money on those meetings or on the diet goods.
And then recently, really interestingly, Susie's strayed into my old territory, into drama. And I don't know if you've been lucky enough to hear In Therapy on Radio 4. Yeah, I can see some nods. And really fascinating, where Susie has given actors who have worked on their characters and they're improvising, but it's a work through improvisation. But you're actually...
I know nothing.
You know nothing. They just come in.
They work with the director. They come in, we record for half an hour and cut to, record for maybe 25 minutes, cut to 15.
And they're on the iPlayer, you can get them.
Yeah, you can
really worth listening to, really fantastic.
And then I've done the books of the scripts, so that what I'm thinking of when I say what I say. I think what was interesting about using actors rather than real people, apart from the ethics of the fact that you can't use real people. I mean, you could use famous people, but that wouldn't be quite the same, is that it's like fiction is a truth, and their fictions are totally authentic and truthful and speak to you, and very moving, but also the risk factor for the therapist is the same, I think, as when you meet a new person and you have that desperation to be helpful, but you can't do it by doing that. You kind of have to do it by sitting back and listening and seeing if you've understood, and that's what you have to do with the actors. And now we're coming really to your old thing, which is I think we're going to the National Theatre with it, which will be very scary, because we've just tried it out a couple of times there in their rehearsal studios, where we've taken the actors' improvisations with me, not the ones that are on the radio, other ones. They've learnt the script, which is really hard for them, because they actually created the words. Somebody else has played me, which was really interesting. And we would probably mix and match that with me doing it, maybe a live performance once a week. So, yeah.
And then last but not least, just because it is 20 years, I think, yes, I don't know, Susie was also pretty famous for having been Princess Diana's therapist. And those of you who, like I did, saw that incredible interview and was aware that she'd obviously undergone significant kind of transformation and had acquired an amazing amount of self-knowledge. It was that relationship, that therapeutic relationship with Susie, which led to that. So I'll kick off. So I suppose I'd like you to talk about your route to writing about women and food, and particularly, I suppose, and I don't know if this is interesting for you, but one of my questions is, did the therapeutic relationships and what you discovered in those sessions lead you to the thinking about the food, or was it the other way around?
No, it was the other way around. This is really in the olden days, okay? It was 1970s, and everything. It was a moment where everything was up for grabs, although there was a public conversation going on. We only had one public conversation in those days, and it was delivered to everybody in class terms, right? You know, there weren't a million public conversations. And women's liberation was on the agenda, which meant we were investigating everything from the perspective of this thing that we were grasping to understand, which was, God, we were second-class citizens. We had women's oppression. What was it about? And everybody was into very worthy aspects of this, like the power structure and wages, domestic labor versus who takes care of the children, all incredibly profound. And I got very interested in why we were so messed up around food in our bodies, and thinking about that in political terms. So I became part of a group that discussed it, and then became interested in horror of horrors, because back in 1971, 72, you really didn't talk about psychotherapy or psychoanalysis. It really was something so hidden. But I was in New York at the time, so it was less hidden. So then I began to learn about psychotherapy and to apply psychotherapeutic ways of thinking without taking out the political, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
And being guided by, well, what is this? We've got a massive social problem. I thought it was massive then, that women were troubled by their bodies, but it wasn't like it is now, where people are over the toilet bowl and take it for granted that they're going to be throwing up, and they take it for granted they're going to have troubled bodies for the rest of their lives, and they're going to do their 10,000 steps a day, and they're going to avoid food or eat clean food or whatever it is, whatever the current manipulation is, and they have to look a certain way. It was not that bad. I mean, it was nothing compared to the situation as it is today, which is why a few years ago I wrote another book called Bodies, because I wanted to look at what had happened in the culture that meant that really we don't have bodies. We have to construct and make bodies these days, that they are our production rather than having bodies that we try to reduce or manipulate or whatever. And one of the things that strikes me, and I'm a general psychotherapist, psychoanalyst, is that people come into the consulting room now with all sorts of problems. Their kids are difficult or works hard, or they've got a bereavement, or they don't know how to be in a relationship. But en passant, they will say something about their bodies and food with a sort of sense that it's never going to change, that they're going to be troubled forever. And that to me is so tragic and such an outrage.
So that's interesting. I'm going to jump to a question then, which I was going to ask later, which is, do you think they can be, cured, helped, whatever, in a therapeutic situation, or do you have to have societal change in order to be psychologically healthy? Does that make sense that way? Yeah.
Look, I think what was possible for me and my mates was that we were all doing it together. We were all thinking and challenging, and also the beauty industry was not quite as relentless. I mean, I don't think it was the whole of Selfridges and John Lewis that was just beauty. I think it was smaller. And that's partly why we had endangered bodies, because we thought young women need to be engaged in this together, not necessarily to talk about their problems per se, but to be engaged in a process that contests this, that talks about what does it mean that the fashion industry is worth, or fast fashion is worth 22 billion? You know, and we've got a GDP of 2 trillion. So it's very big. What does it mean that our food industry is so big? What does it mean that cosmetic surgery has creating apps for 6-year-olds to make them feel shit about their bodies from that age on? So I think you need both, but obviously individuals can change. But the reason I write, I suppose, is because what I learn in the consulting room is so moving and anguishing and valiant, and that I want to share it. And so that's another way of putting it in public. I mean, for people being in public with it, I suppose. I mean, you're asking the key question. Our society's a bit crazy, and we need society-wide political therapeutic interventions.
I mean, one thing that actually I'm just talking, wasn't I? One of my questions was that I think, obviously I'm a similar generation, that my generation, we were angry. I remember being angry. I remember once being at university or whatever, and I cut all my hair ridiculously short, and me and my best friend did, we dyed our hair orange, and my best friend's mum went, well, that won't look very nice, dear. And we both went, we don't want to look nice, you know. But I see my daughters, I think they feel like they have to not only achieve really brilliantly at school, but look beautiful, and they're judged all the time by what they look like.
One thing I think is really impressive about young people is that they have both pieces, don't they? Because they can look kind of like a regular person, and then they can dress up and do the glam things. But the inside experience is that they've got to be available to do that. So, and you can take a selfie where you look horrible, which I think is something that my generation never could have done, right? And yet you need a posed picture that's absolutely magnificent. So there is some bandwidth in what younger people are doing that interests me.
And do you think things have got, you obviously say the fashion industry and the cosmetic industry, that's all grown. So you think, and obviously there's a whole
There's just too much money in it. It's coming to a boy near you. I mean,
so that takes us back to political. So then it's an issue of
it's an issue of capital.
Capitalism.
It's an issue of global. I mean, this is a public health emergency which we've exported. It's called body hatred. How do all those companies grow? They sell to Africa and China and Japan and Korea. They sell body hatred. They sell the Western body, or the manufactured Western body.
And do you think, obviously part of it is making money, but it's an incredibly successful tool for cutting a woman down to size. All you need to do, well, it's interesting, isn't it? My youngest, who's 13, went to a party last week and came back, said she'd had a horrible time. And it was just, when she arrived, a boy said to her, who's quite dysfunctional, and she knows he's dysfunctional, he just said, oh, you look really fat. And she said, I know I should have got over it, but I couldn't. And that one, you look fat, three words.
Yeah, I suppose my daughter's equivalent, I remember we were stuck at that age. She got ill in Spain, and we were stuck in a pharmacy buying whatever it was. And she knew every single makeup brand with every colour of eyeshadow and every colour of lipstick, the names of them all, and the rouge and the whole thing. And I thought, I think you're meant to be learning the names of the birds and the flowers and fossils. And I just thought, wow, all of that brain capacity caught up in learning and absorbing and knowing that. And please get through it by the time you're 16 or 17, because...
But do you, back to that question, it's
and
such...
she did, so...
She did, oh, that's...
I mean, yes.
But it's such a good way of keeping women... I think
yeah,
it's such an effective way of keeping women
the more we've wanted
place.
to take up space, the smaller we've been asked to be, and the smaller the representations, and every single surface, including our needs, are found to be wanting.
Our knees.
Yes, there are, there are articles in the Daily Mail about knees. And and also every representation is a passive representation. It's kind of looking to camera or kind of looking both vulnerable and tough at the same time. It's a very interesting thing that we're supposed to project. It's not like we show people doing their jobs.
No.
Right? The catwalk doesn't show somebody looking down a microscope or titrating something that's not what they show. They show us a bit like, not like how Amy produced herself, but in a production mode.
And if you could change, if you had some magic wands, what would you attack first? And what would
God. You mean apart from capitalism as it's presently constituted?
Yeah.
I really don't know, because visual culture is so... We can't account for the number of images we see. In the olden days, it used to be 5,000 a week. That was before the internet. And those were already enhanced. Or I don't know. That's a good question. I wish you hadn't asked it, because I definitely can't answer it, and I'll be pondering it the rest of the day.
And obviously the world's changed. Has it changed your thinking, or has your thinking changed? How is it that? Tell me a bit about your journey about thinking about women and bodies.
The body, or in general, in life?
Why don't we have both? If you could, well, I'm sure people will be interested in both.
Well, I feel very angry still, and it's very tragic about the body. I feel furious that this is any kind of time that we have to spend inside of ourselves on it. I hate the fact that I went to a party of a long-listed book prize writer, and her this week, fabulous novel, Home Fire, really recommend it. A modern version of Antigone based on what's going on in terms of terrorism, if you want to call it that. And her friends were saying her younger friends were saying, God, your friends are pretty hot. And my friend and I thought, that is so insulting. We are so old, and we have to still be projecting something which we didn't even know we were projecting or having projected onto us. And I thought, what's the question I'm answering, Abigail?
I suppose it's how your thinking's changed, how the world has changed.
Okay,
how you're thinking.
Now I used to think it didn't affect me, at this level. It was okay. We knew there are loads of women in old age homes who had anorexia. Or you can walk around Camden and see people of my age who are kind of bent over and very wizened, and they're not actually, they're not that old, they're my age. And I suppose my resentment has it changed? So my resentment's just bigger, or my pain is just bigger.
Pain is bigger. And how do you deal with that? And
get cross.
Get cross.
Try and do something with groups of women. And sometimes I can't do anything.
And do you... Yes. Okay.
I can't do anything, but I accept join with others.
When I was at that endangered, it was then called Endangered Species Conference, and this might have been my impression and what I took away, but the thing I remember, there were lots of things that really struck me. One of the things, and I have to confess, there were pictures on the wall that had been manipulated, and we're all used to seeing. And there was one that was, there were some manipulated, this woman artist had manipulated where their necks were thicker than their waist. And the shocking thing was I didn't notice that my eye was so, which I found really shocking. But one of the things you said that you thought it was, and I got the impression that it was the most pressing issue, was that actually we could not achieve any kind of sense of liberation or coming away from being second-class citizens if we didn't tackle the external eye, the eye or whatever, and the body image thing. Do you think that's still true?
Well, apparently, look, it's not an issue in and of itself. It's an issue that's connected to issues of sexuality, of rape, of sexual violence, of the denial of civil society. I spoke at the UN several years, at the same year actually, the UN Women, and put it on the agenda. And there were women from Indonesia talking about how girls of 16 were flourishing, and then they just withdrew because the whole feeling about their bodies had totally taken them over. It was later there, and so their participation just got reduced. There were women from India talking about how it was affecting their participation in civil society. There were women from Italy, it was from all over, from Sudan and South Sudan. Can you imagine that this was a critical issue for women there that was not spoken about, that they were now going to speak about? I mean, it was extraordinary. So but it's not, when we think about rape as a weapon of war, that's not dissimilar to the issue of our bodies and how women's bodies are perceived and how we internalize that. If we think about the medical situation and the whole reproductive rights issue, it's not. So it depends how big you make the agenda, really.
I know, but I'm just really conscious of, I can't remember, was it last year or the year before, when the government tried to set something up about, I can't remember what it was now, so this sounded a bit vague, a woman to talk about the fashion industry and there was just a huge backlash of people taking, really, I don't even remember, the press and what it really taking
But they did that when they had the Labour government did the first body image summit, and what struck me, this must be 1999, somewhere like that. And immediately I think it was the Daily Mail, said, oh, this is, nanny state. This was after incredible testimony from fashion editors and saying, we can't even buy clothes at the size normal women are. We're not allowed to do that, right? And the Mail attacked it as this is the nanny state. And I saw the government brief against their own summit because, God forbid, they should, instead of standing up robustly and say, sorry, this is your mother, your sister, your niece, your daughter, and your wife. Could you bloody well shut up and recognize this is really important? But they didn't. So I think there's such interesting stuff going on in fashion schools where people are trying to be much edgier, just a bit like you when you did that, and to say clothes have meaning without having to go into fast fashion in this crazy way. And yet we're told fashion is just fun. But actually it's an incredibly deadly industry for a lot of people. And it's one of the wealthiest industries in the world. If you look at the rich list, the world rich list, and you take out Google's, but even if you don't take out Google's, the guy who owns Zara, that brand, and the Estee Lauder, those two are in like the top 10 or 15. I mean, does that tell us something about where the women's pound is going?
Just explain, because I don't know, and I'm sorry if I don't know. Fast fashion, what does that mean?
Fast fashion is the thing where you can buy something new every week, and it changes so fast. It's made under absolutely terrible conditions. If you think about the fact that this is often really slave labor, we know about that because we know about the fires in Bangladesh and all of that. The dyes are ruining the water supplies. The way the cotton's being grown is very damaging, and all of that constitutes fast fashion. And it available in Camden Market, but everywhere. It's not that we're not drawn to it. Of course we are, because if that's the territory we're offered, that's the territory we're going to engage in. It's not that we're passive idiot victims. We're not, but we're going to engage in it.
And what would you say to lots of women who are really intelligent, politically aware, competent, and are still really struggling with bodies and body image and eating, and that they feel so, I don't know, ashamed, maybe ashamed is the right word, that they can't escape, and that intellectually they've got it all sorted, and then emotionally that it's really problematic.
I think I'd say, could you dare to be okay with your body? Could you dare, because it's a risk? Could you dare to eat when you're hungry?
Right.
And stop when you're full? Could you, what would it mean if you weren't every 15 minutes attacking yourself? Just think about if you could dare to do that. Could you look at pictures of yourself from a few years ago when you felt awful and look at them and you'll see that actually you looked gorgeous and why should you miss that now? Because that's the same thing's happening. I think those are the things I'd say.
Can I ask you a really personal question? But you are naturally incredibly slim.
Yeah, but that's because I eat when I'm hungry and I stop when I'm full.
Oh, do you think everybody...
Yes. I mean, I'd be my size because I'm my size. I might, if I had a bigger frame, I'd be if I had a smaller frame, I'd be smaller, yes.
But do you think it might be easier, like if you had a bigger frame and eating when you're hungry?
No.
You don't...
Well, if we didn't have prejudice about size.
Right. So you'd have to...
We have a lot of prejudice about size.
Because we
have to be diminished.
We'd have to be diminished. We have to be diminished. Okay, so as a mother of 3 girls, and I don't know if there are other mothers here, but all for the girls, what if you could give some advice, what would you give?
Never stand in front of the mirror and say yuck.
Right.
Because I think the thing is, this is not to attack mums, but everything your little kid sees, they are learning that's how you be a girl, that's how you be a woman, right? Never say anything about food at the table, except, oh gosh, I think I've had enough, or that looks so lovely, but I don't need any more, or something like that. Don't do any healthy eating stuff at all, because they get enough of that in school and it's usually delivered very badly. I mean, have lots of good food, obviously. Talk about how bodies move, talk about the potential of a body and what fun it is to run around. I mean, I was brought up as a secular Jew, and we didn't do exercise. It was like, somehow that was like nothing you did whatsoever. And not worse than that, we had contempt for it, right? So I never did sport at school or any of those things. It took me ages to learn that those things were fun to do.
Oh, well, that's good, because I wanted to ask you about that. So let me just talk about the relationship between how you're being a Jew. I'm not saying being Jewish, because you'd make a distinction.
Ish seems like a diminishment, really.
Okay, being a Jew intersects with your being a feminist. What has that relationship, and how has it worked? Because it'll be probably different now as it was when you were being brought up, I would imagine.
Look, as I said, I was brought up secular, which meant that occasionally we had the Jewish holidays, but that was occasionally. I didn't learn the stories properly. I think I was sent to Sunday school but didn't learn. How does it intersect with being... Well, there's a very strong tradition of women ruling the roost in Jewish families. Yes. There really is. And, men are kind of, and it's a terrible contempt for men, actually. It's awful. But I definitely know about that. And my mother was she worked, she had a job outside the home, and she was always on committees for this Jewish organization and that one, progressive ones. So I suppose I grew up knowing Jewish and social justice were absolutely critically entwined. And look, this is how communities divide themselves. I learned that we were those kind of Jews, which meant left-wing and active, whereas there were other kind of Jews who were interested in other kinds of things, and we weren't like that at all. So there was a lot of othering of both non-Jews and of other kinds of Jews, which I think was extremely awful, but that is what it was. So I suppose I was so backward as a feminist that I didn't even recognize there was anything odd with my brother learning to drive at 16 or going out and me not being allowed to do that. I mean, I was so blinded that I was fighting other things, right? I was on C&D and all of those things. But I suppose once I understood something about women's second-class citizenship, then I could embrace it and I could look at how we'd internalized that, how we'd been brought up in the mother-daughter relationship to absorb feelings of unentitlement, feelings of not acting on our own behalf. We'd act for others, but we didn't act. We were midwives to everybody else's activities. I think that's really changed now. But it was something to do with being Jewish. I don't know.
I mean, it's interesting, that thing of, I often think that the thing you initially said about it being disrespectful to men, I often think that the right-wing press or whatever got it wrong in a sense, because actually feminism is actually much more respectful. It says we can be better. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're not that small.
Yeah.
You know.
There's the most incredible film on at the moment called The Work, which is about guys in maximum security prison, in Folsom in California, I think. And I know this is a diversion, but it really made me think about the origins of second wave feminism. And they have a therapy program, and they bring in members of the public who go through therapy with the inmates. And the inmates are their guides, but they're also in therapy themselves. It's kind of an encounter weekend. It's 4 days, actually. It's the most extraordinary film. I really recommend it. But it's all about fatherless men. Literally fatherless, because they weren't there. The guys, and these are lifers in jail, and then the guys outside who aren't in jail, but of course are the same people, but they just happen not to be. And I was thinking, well, the whole point about feminism was recognizing we were both motherless women, and that we needed to remake the whole notion of family so that our mothers wouldn't be the ones, and we wouldn't be the ones providing for the dependent relationships for everybody else without us having any dependency needs of our own being met. I don't know, that seemed to be an answer to your question.
Yes, no, it does. And actually, another chutzpah question, if you don't mind. You were married to a man.
Yeah.
You're now married to a woman.
Yeah, strange life.
Has that,
But apparently not strange at all these days.
has that changed your feminism or your relationship with... I'm not talking about being surrogate, I'm not interested. I'm talking about, has it changed how you...
Well, I think actually what's more interesting for me is the fact that everybody's fascinated by this, I mean, my friends, whereas they wouldn't be with their kids, right? Because their kids are much more, but because Jeanette is so much younger than me, I mean, not that I'm cradle snatching, but she is of a different generation. That is a difference, because her attitude, her feminist, she thinks I'm very crazy that I won't have my face fixed, I won't be rehabbed, and or whatever it is. Whereas I think, what are you talking about? We fought so hard to be who we are. So I'm more intrigued by the kind of moments of you come of age with Thatcher, or perhaps you come of age now, and so you live online. Those are very different social experiences that yeah. So it's an age meaning of feminism, and I mean maybe some of you who are here will say what it means for you, because I find that more interesting. The sort of I don't know what else I can say about it.
Well, it's hard, isn't it? You can't generalise about men and women from particular relationships. You did get married you had a Jewish wedding, did you not?
I did, at the Freud Museum.
At the Freud Museum, yeah, my friend Rebecca did that. I'm conscious of time, and I'm conscious that you've probably lots of other people I've got lots more questions, but being democratic, do other people I'm sure would like to ask Susie questions. I think we have a roving mic as well, if people want to ask, so do you go ahead? Okay, they are. Yeah, in the front.
Oh, would it be from your family?
Yeah, it's from my middle daughter, Nina. Not backward in coming forward, I'd have to say, is Nina, in terms of...
Thanks for the introduction. No, it's completely unrelated to being your daughter, although I enjoyed the references. So I think that the problem of how much kind of body-hating encouragement there is out there is now so big that it's, like, I'm quite optimistic, but I don't think it's combatable. Like, all of these industries are so pervasive, they're all over everywhere. I don't think you can necessarily actually, like, it's gone too far. But I think that in the way that kind of in schools there's an acknowledgement that the porn industry needs to be combated with sex education, and there's a big kind of controversy over how early that needs to be. Like, should 6-year-olds be being taught about this? Because, yeah, 7-year-old boys are already watching porn or whatever. In that way, should there be a discussion coming in about compulsory, like, for girls and boys, like, compulsory body empowerment? Because just as, like, you could say the porn industry leads to all sorts of dangerous kind of things, and you want to tell people what's right, what's normal and what's not okay, in that way that body hating is leading to, like, it's a huge drain on the NHS, like, just dealing with eating disorders alone, and all sorts of things it connects to, as you said, like it's all connected. Do you think that there should be some kind of discussion, or at least the beginnings of a discussion about some form of compulsory, like bringing that in, of like work out a way to ignore this, work out a way to feel empowered from age 6? If that's how young people are beginning to hate themselves, that's how young they need to be targeted, with some form of like actual compulsory educational encouragement to be able to resist that.
Do I think that? Yes. Did everybody hear? I mean, I definitely think that, but on the other hand, I think the teachers would have to be they would have to have their own awareness really raised, because they themselves are inside of the system. And that's really a problem. They're not exempt from it. And I am horrified to hear that boys are watching porn at 7, because it kind of doesn't, it is really crazy. But yes, I think our educational system is not really about building robustness and resilience and living in your body. I think it's about doing things to yourself all the time, getting the stuff in there rather than being and living. So yes, you're absolutely right. But I'm kind of horrified about the porn being at 7. Because when I wrote Bodies, I was talking to colleagues in Philadelphia who was talking about boys being given blowjobs at 11, ending up in the counselor's office at school, so upset because they didn't want it, but the girls had perceived that their power came from being able to give to boys. So it was completely crazy in terms of the girls' psychology and the way they were coming to feel good about themselves, and it was really terrible for the boys. So, yeah, I think definitely.
Have you ever been tempted to write about pornography? Because you haven't.
I haven't really, no. I mean, I think there are such good campaigners around pornography, and people who are like, is it called pro-sex, without being into... So no, I haven't. I don't know enough about it. I don't know how to watch it myself, but that probably puts me in a minority. I'm horrified about the size of the industry. But most of the things that were pornographic when I was a kid are now on the front cover of Vogue. I mean, the ads are pornographic. Everything I look at is pornographic, if you want to put it in those terms. And one of the terrible things about the NHS that worries the sort of flooding of it is, A, there's lousy treatment, but there are so many young women turning up with wanting labiaplasties because they have, and this is directly related to porn, because they don't think their labias look right, and then they go on some gynecologist's website, and particularly if they hit an American one, he will show you that every labia there's something wrong with it. In fact, they're just ordinary labias. And it's absolutely appalling.
Yeah, can I just add to that as well?
Do you want to have the mic? Because yeah, I know you have got quite a one.
Yeah, I've got lots of things going around in my head, but what you just mentioned there, I studied midwifery for 2 years without actually having the intention of ever being a midwife. It was kind of because I wanted to know about women and pregnancy and stuff. But yeah, and we looked at FGM. And it's like some of the categories of FGM are exactly what Western women are now going to have and pay for to have. So it's really quite skewed.
Exactly. And it's, I mean, the foot binding is no very different than the shoes that Amy had upstairs. Really. It's the internalization of that's how I have to represent myself. And one of the things there's a fantastic program there was at UCH trying to contest the labiaplasty and help young women, but the private clinics will do it. So we now raise girls who are so troubled about their bodies that they feel they must do away with this aspect of themselves at the same time as they might be fighting around FGM. It's appalling.
There's a woman there. Yeah, there's just one, there, and then we'll come to you at the back, don't worry.
In regards to the first question, we keep talking about the system taking care of troubled people and, for example, at the age of 6, bringing something into schools to take care of kids to make them aware, but we're completely ignoring the parents' side of things. Why do we think that parents are not capable of doing the job of educating their children in a way that it's going to be enough to understand those issues?
I think it's a great question. Look, if parents can be an antiviral agent, right, that is the most you can hope for, because the culture is very, very powerful. But I've just been doing a training course for NCT women. This is National Childbirth. So these are women who are working with women about to give birth or postnatally. And one of the very disturbing things that the trainers said is that the mums are so preoccupied with their bodies that they want to get back into their genes within 2 seconds. So that birth and the getting to know your infant and getting to know yourself as a mother, probably the most momentous thing you ever do, is on a spreadsheet and is something to be moved away from. So you're absolutely right. What do we do in terms of supporting parents being able to be robust enough to trust themselves and to open agendas? It's really quite difficult.
At the back, yes. The two people at the back, yeah? Oh, do you want to go? Yeah. Okay.
A very basic and mundane question on sort of something practical we can do ourselves. I always struggle with what's the right way to. Should we compliment each other on the way we look? Oh, people post pictures. Oh, you look really trim in that dress. There's always these different sort of compliments that I think reinforce this culture that we're so dependent on how we seem to others. So what's the right thing to do? Because sometimes I feel like, okay, I'm going to try to compliment people without talking about their size or their clothes. But then do I look like I'm just horrible and never can quite?
That's actually a question, right? Because
especially when you're thin, people hate you.
The revolutionary act might be to not, but I don't think we can do that. I don't think we can do away with all those notions of being gorgeous but can you talk about their energy? Can you talk about their serenity? Can you talk about can you describe something to do with personality? Or that photo so showed you're this? I mean, it's clunky, but maybe we could learn how to do it.
Good question, yeah. Next, yes, you.
Going on from that, I feel if I meet a man or a woman, and I'm older than the majority of people here, that's the first thing I say, God, you've lost some weight, you look fantastic. And I said it to my friend here. Or even if it's a boy, God, you look so fit, which is terrible. I mean, I really want to stop doing that. But there's two quite positive...
Try going cold turkey and see what...
Kill me, I don't know what I'll say. But then the thing I wanted to say is that we aren't emphasising the fact in this room that boys have anorexia too.
Absolutely.
And I think we have to remember that as parents and people who are going to be parents in the future. It's really, really horrible and dangerous and scary. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that, on the positive note, the media is facing up to the need to help with educating us, the public, about this, in a big or a small way. I thought it was pretty impressive. If anybody saw front of the Evening Standard, big thing on the front of the Evening Standard, don't talk about diets in front of your girls.
That's only taken 40 years.
Yes,
right?
it should have said your children.
I mean, I think it's a little bit like the ecology movement, or environmental movement, which has taken 50 years to have any kind of political weight and not to have people go, right? Which is kind of what you were talking about before, is that, and yeah, it's absolutely critical. But I think you could go cold turkey on that, and you could say, gosh, so lovely to see you, or whatever.
Yes, back, yeah.
I will stand up so you can see me. I would like to know, is it possible and how is it possible to redefine the meaning we give to words? You mentioned your daughter going out and somebody made a comment to her about her looking fat. And it got me thinking about the meaning that we give to a word. That's just a descriptive word. But how we've now come to associate the meaning of the word, it's the equivalent of being sworn at. How can we change the meaning of the word back to what it should be, which is just a descriptive word?
Well, I think fat activists would say, yeah, use the word. I'm fat and I'm proud, in that sense. But I don't think it's worked because they've been trying to do it for a long time, and because you've got the combined pharmaceutical industry fashion industry, everybody else, really zinging on fat. And it's such a prejudice now. It really is it's almost a civil rights issue. I don't know how we reclaim it, except, yeah, I am. Yeah, I am. I'm actually really comfy, or whatever. Do you have a problem? I mean, I think you might have to be sassy about it. You know, it's a description. You're absolutely right. It's about adiposity. That is all it is. It's not got a moral category. It's not a moral category. And I think one of the terrible issues is the reason people can't stand it is the problem that shows. Whereas other people may have exactly the same problem, but it doesn't show because they're managing their eating in a different way.
Interesting. Yeah. What are your thoughts? Hang on, Jude, just hang on, because we can hear you really well, but it's hard for people behind you. Thanks so much.
What are your thoughts on the wellness movement and our new obsession with working out and veganism and vegetarianism? Do you think it's just...
I feel very sympathetic to people going for that stuff, but I think it's a way to manage an eating and a body problem. I remember when vegetarianism became very big in the 60s and 70s, it was the same issue. And now this whole notion of cleanness and wellness, I mean, don't think that industry isn't part of Big Pharma and the food industry and the publishing side. And of course there are lovely things about it. And look, I absolutely adore food, and I cook all the time, at least twice a day. And I do make beautiful things because I get a lot of pleasure from it. But it's kind of a fetishization of something, isn't it? Because we're kind of alienated from normal food production, and I think it's a way to manage distress for a lot of people, sadly.
The thing I found most interesting that you said was about young people at the moment and feeling that they need to be these kind of two identities, this kind of, oh, I'm ugly, look at me, I can joke about that, but also I can be beautiful. And having two younger sisters, that's something I see a lot of and worry about a lot. And I was just wondering how you think that will manifest itself in terms of identity and what kind of women you think they might become, what kind of adults they'll be.
So don't know, right? It's just something I've observed. I really don't know. I think it's for you to tell and for you to imagine. We did a book a couple of years ago called 50 Shades of Feminism. There were some lovely essays by young women in it. And then there's a 50 Shades of Younger Women. It's not called that. I can't remember what it's called, which we supported the youngsters, as I'm very old now, I can say that. And they had really interesting ideas, absolutely, about who they were and who they are and who they want to be. But I don't know about what this elasticity will do. I hope it might open something up, but I just don't know. I don't know. Sorry.
Before we end, I'm just going to totally abuse my position of being into it, to share an idea that I don't think is really going to take hold, but I just want to know what you think, which is that, you know, we have jury service where you're called up. Because what if you had a jury service for all models and all, so on the catwalk and all advertising, and so Marks and Spencer, whoever it was, they just have to call and you just get me, or you'd get my mum, or you'd get whatever, and you'd get a genuine people in the photos.
Well, it's interesting because the German magazine Begita did that, and for many years, and Dove has always in its campaigns used ordinary women and regular lighting. I mean, model lighting, but not fix the pictures except for, you know, what are called photo floors. And that was enormously helpful, but they didn't, although all the work they do behind the scenes, which is all about work in schools and work with bullying and mums and mentors and teachers, they weren't bold enough in their advertising later, and they're rethinking it now. So you're absolutely right. We need jury service in terms of, no, and we're going to be doing what we do. We're going to be active. We're not going to be passive on those catwalks. We're going to be active in relation to our bodies.
Absolutely. I know that people probably want to talk loads, but I'm also aware there's other people in, Susie's also probably got things to do. So I just really want to thank you. It's such an honour and a privilege for me to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.